That's number one for me. If you want to get strong and you want to get like dangerously strong, like stronger than everyone else around you, you need to be that person that like you're going to show up in the gym and you're going to fucking kill yourself and you're going to go and you're going to, we'll talk about the more kind of finite habits, the things that are just responsible for training. You'll eat a bunch of food, you'll sleep well, you'll stay hydrated. I mean, you're going to come back and you're going to do it again tomorrow. And you're going to do it the next day. And you're going to feel broken for weeks and months and years on end before you get to that place where you're strong. You're strong. You may never get there if, the people that I've known that have pursued this, like, yeah, they're stronger than most people, but they're never there. Like, they're never like, I'm strong, I'm good, I'm going to stop now. Like, it's something that it's just this driving force inside of people that like you're going to challenge yourself no matter what you do. And I think that really echoes into like a lot of things that we've talked about in the past, and like even like the way that we'll talk about deloading. It's like we're not just going to decrease load. We're going to give you a variation that's self-limiting, and you're going to go as hard as you fucking can on that. But there's going to be less collateral in terms of neurological fatigue, in terms of physiological fatigue. There's going to be less of a recovery debt because of the constraints that we've given you. So I think for me, the number one thing in terms of, we'll call it a habit, but I think it's deeper than that, is you have to be willing to seek out challenges on a continual basis.
Yeah, you bring up something interesting that I don't think anyone's ever touched on. And it's a
Sick.
fairly well-known phenomenon in like psychological literature, but I would assume it would bleed its way into physiology as well. And it's around the idea of DNA and genetics. Because it's so easy to scapegoat genetics. And I think whenever we talk about resistance training, strength, hypertrophy, genetics gets kind of, it gets pigeonholed into like you either have it or you don't. But I would say the most accurate way to look at genetics is what's classified as a study called epigenetics, right? Epigenetics is this idea where, your DNA, your genetic makeup puts a bullet in the chamber and your environment pulls the trigger, right? So it's a symbiotic relationship of nature and nurture. And I think to a large part that's true, but I think when people talk about genetics in the realm of strength sports or aesthetics or athleticism, I think they forget that genetics themselves are a bit of a fluid medium. What I mean by that is genes and their expression can be and are triggered by exposures to stress.
Right.
So the genetics you have, sure, there's a predetermined codification of how exposures to stress will manifest genes and their expression, but you have to expose them to stress. So you really don't know what you can become. And this is where the physical and the psychological sort of like merge. You don't know what you can become until you willingly expose yourself to that stress. So, it's very easy for people. And I know people who, they have small hands and they just go, well, my genetics. And they just like fucking scuttle off to a Pilates class. And you're like, my guy, like, not all hope is lost on you, my small gloved friend. Like, you can still turn it on, and what you can turn on is the expression of latent or dormant genes that need the exposure of stress to actually manifest as adaptations or signaling processes within the body. So it's funny because you mentioned that all the strong people got there by what we would classify theoretically and academically as inefficient path. Right. But it's the inefficiency in the path that I think expresses the genes through the exposure of what could be unnecessary stress in a proper environment. But it's completely necessary to get the gene expression that you need in order to be someone who has the genetics to get to a certain place. Right. So, and genetics are a tricky conversation. When you're in the presence of good genetics, when like we've been around athletes and you're just like, okay, now you have you have an opportunity. Like when you see the best athletes in the world, you're like, okay, can we take this bullet, this silver bullet, this armor piercing GoldenEye 007 one shot kill bullet of genetics, and can we put it in the barrel of a proper training environment or proper habitual lifestyle environment. And that's where you start to see just the entails of human performance, right? That's where you see the fastest and the biggest and the
Yeah.
most powerful and the best at any given athletic endeavor. But a lot of people think genetics are binary, and they're not. So, and I think especially now with this, the language in the strength and hypertrophy space, in the more generic general population, fitness meets Instagram meets TikTok. And there's this idea of like stimulus to fatigue ratio. And it's like, okay, when we talk about like, doing only the right amount of volume to stimulate what's necessary, it's like, let me tell you about being really strong. It is completely unnecessary.
Yeah.
Like when you get really, really strong, it negatively affects the rest of your life, like
Yeah.
in a very meaningful way. But that's because it is so unnecessary.
Mhm.
It is so unnecessary to have extra physiological strength. Now, you want to have like, good strength to body weight ratio. Sure. Your body will aid in that process up until which point that process becomes inefficient to the process of survival, right?
Yeah.
We are optimized for survival. We are not optimized for strength, right? We are optimized for strength as so far as we are optimized for survival, and strength is a utility in that optimization process. But past that, there is no more. So, you are getting strong in spite of your survival if you're trying to get really strong. So you need to understand that optimization is really a law of averages, or a reversion to the mean, if you will. You're trying to find that mid part of the bell curve of like, efforts and outputs, where it's like, no, 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 no. When you're optimizing for like genetic expression of stress exposure and how that could help, how that could really help turn things on in the genetic category to the best that your predetermined codification of your genes will allow for, you need that fatigue. You need those inefficiencies. You need those prolonged stressors, right? And
Mhm.
it's that helps really from a base code level start to realize your potential of strength, right? Because you're not going to reach your true genetic potential without exposures of undue stress, right? Like trying to just hit the ball out of the park and do what's necessary to stimulate hypertrophy and then go home. It's like, oh, this isn't for you, because you're not going to reach, sure, the threshold to, stimulating muscle protein synthesis and, building new muscle tissue. That's like the main floor. The amount of stress you need to put your body under to express latent genes, that's like the 10th floor, right? And between the first floor and the 10th floor is all of the fatigue that people are afraid of, right? So I would say, to kind of throw my hat in the ring and dovetail off of what I think is like such an undervalued point, is the dynamic nature of genetic expression due to stress exposure, is the idea of strong people do more,
Yeah.
right? Strong people do the extra set. Strong people do the extra rep. Strong people carry all the groceries in from the car, right? Strong people just, they do more. And no one, and look, okay, I've been on the other side of it. I know the strongest guys in the world. I've been in the room with your world's strongest men. I've been in the room with the strongest powerlifters. Like I've been there where records have fallen. There is a point where it's like, okay, yeah, Dan Bell is going to deadlift maybe once a month, right? Sure, that's him, doing less. There's a strategy, but for most people, and I would say 99.999% of the time, most people need to get in the habit of doing more, right? Do that drop set, do that rest pause set, do that extra workout. Don't take that day off, right? Like there is to use a term, a pussification, if you will. I believe that's a term out of
Pussification.
pussification out of
Okay.
California.
Right.
Is
That's
that the
gotta be a
correct term?
California thing. Yeah.
Okay.
Origin,
Where
San Francisco.
or yes, the etymology of the word pussification comes out of Latin English, California.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a noun to describe, an
A bunch of
adjective, just a
pussies.
bunch of pussies. The process of becoming a huge pussy.
Yeah. Big
Um,
pussy.
and it permeates down to a crowd that needs to hear that they need to do more, right?
Yeah.
So I think one of the one of the issues in the hyper optimization crowd is like, what are you optimizing for? Sure, if you're optimizing for hypertrophy, the threshold or the floor you have to get off of is the main floor. Yeah, okay, cool. Your reps slowed down. You're between the reps 1 to 30. You're in 1 to 3 RIR. You're doing 10 to 20 sets per muscle group a week. You're training at least 3 times a week, ideally training each muscle group twice a week, maybe 3 in some cases. That's it. That's where we're at. That's like the research. That's a meta-analysis, peer-reviewed fucking,
That's so optimal.
PubMed. And you know what? For the outcome of putting on a bit of tissue, sure, you eat in a moderate deficit, you get protein, maybe you sleep every now and then, and you're kind of halfway there. But strength, like strength to the point where it's a topic of conversation, right?
Right.
Strength when we're to a point of where people around you are attributing feats of strength to you that are actually impossible, but they think you can do it. Right? Like, oh, like you can lift a car. Ma'am, I can't. Like not even close to it. But it's like that type of strength that goes above and beyond. And how do you go above and beyond? By going above and beyond.
Yeah.
Right. So I think my first habit would be strong people do more.
Right.
Period.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a good point to go along with that and to really put these pussies in their place is that what you see from like everyone is so accessible nowadays. Like the strongest people in the world, they're on your phone, they're on your screen, and you can see what they're doing in training. And I think a really important point to realize is the things that got them there are not the things that are going to perpetuate that, right? They're not the things that are going to get, I don't know who Dan Bell is because I don't pay attention to anyone. But if this guy's deadlifting once a month, like that's not what got him to the point where he's strong enough that deadlifting once a month is going to be a thing that continues to push the envelope, right? There was a point where he was probably in the gym deadlifting 2, 3 times a week, maybe even more. Because the thing about strong people, they're a little bit retarded, and I'm speaking from experience. but 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 the important thing to understand is that like this person that is so accessible to you, their training is so accessible to you, it's not recreating what they're doing right now that's going to get you to the place that they're at or the relative place. Like most people will never be there, and that's okay. Like it's the genetic potential is just not there, and there's going to be this point where someone who is a genetic outlier gets in the right environment and they have the right stimulus to become this much greater than everyone else. And that's sick. Like, fuck yeah. But that's probably not you. That's probably not anyone listening to this podcast. Maybe it is because we have some strong people that listen. But that's not the majority of people, right? So for you to get to your relative potential of that, it's you have to do more. You have to work harder. You have to put yourself in a place that's going to necessitate adaptation. And that needs to be habitual. Like that's not a it's it's Friday, I'm well rested. I ate 30 extra carbs last night. I'm going to go for one extra set today. No. That's everything you do in life. Like it doesn't start and end in the gym. It's like some of the strongest people I know are some of the most successful people I know in other aspects of life. Like they operate successful businesses. They're high performers in their job. Like maybe they have a family and they're like a really good family man. Like there's that carries into other aspects of life because that's a trait, that's a habit that doesn't start and end in the gym. That's a habit that carries with you. And that's like something that you're going to apply to every task that you do is you're going to learn to do it well and you're going to do it until you can do it well. And it's no different with training, no different with strength. So that, that's definitely I think the crux of this conversation is like, are you willing to put yourself in the position to continually fail for the rest of your life? Because that's what strength training is you never win. You're never going to get there. You're never going to beat gravity. Gravity wins 100% of the time. But are you willing to accept that and still try your hardest every single time, knowing that every single session now until the rest of forever, you're going to fail? Like, do you have that in your DNA that you're willing to try that hard? And most people know, and that's okay. You'll always be a pussy, but that's fine. But